case of Chauhan family. Amarjit Chauhan was the owner of Chiba Freight, a thriving fruit import business near Heathrow Airport. To those around him, Amarjit appeared to be a devoted family man and a kind employer, loved by his staff, and sharing a happy life with his wife and 2 young children. Amarjit viewed his employees as a part of his family. To show his appreciation to them during the busy time of the company, he would often treat them to pizza and drinks. He also maintained a calm and approachable leadership style, which earned him great respect from everyone. Amarjit's employees were concerned about the company's future if he were to move to India, a recurring subject in conversations with his wife, Nancy. She hoped that Amarjit, who was 46, would soon be able to retire, allowing them to spend more time with their children. Nancy often told her husband about her desire to return to India. As time went by, Amarjit began to consider Nancy's wish and started thinking about selling their business to move back to their hometown. The plan might have worked if Amarjit Chauhan's ownership of Chiba Freight had not run into trouble. However, someone had his eye on Amarjit's company and was looking to take control of it without investing any money. In January 2003, Kenneth Reagan, who had just been released from prison, looked for a job at Chiba Freight. Amarjit, the company's owner, who had also had his own run-ins with the law due to tax evasion, could relate to Kenneth's struggles. Knowing how hard it could be for people to find work after being out of prison, Amarjit was willing to give Kenneth a chance, which was consistent with his reputation for being understanding and easygoing. Amarjit decided to offer Kenneth a second chance by hiring him as a driver. Kenneth turned out to be a diligent worker, unafraid to tackle any task, and performed his duties excellently. Kenneth was more than just a driver. In the past, he was an expert smuggler nicknamed Captain Cash. By the late 1990s, Kenneth had built up a reputation as a veteran criminal running various freight companies, which served as fronts to hide his real business: smuggling illegal drugs into the UK. He had risen to prominence in London's underworld and mingled with influential figures in the criminal world. Despite his modest demeanor, Kenneth led a life of luxury, perceiving himself as a wealthy socialite and a renowned figure in the global underworld. In 1997, at the peak of his illicit activities, Kenneth met Belinda Bruin, a socialite, at an upscale London bar. He flaunted his wealth, driving a Mercedes and showering her with expensive gifts. She saw him as sophisticated and charming, albeit a bit rough around the edges, a man who impeccably showed off his luxury watches and wasn't afraid to display his wealth. Often seen carrying a briefcase full of cash, Kenneth believed this extravagant lifestyle would boost his social standing. Unbeknownst to her, Belinda Bruin was drawn into Kenneth's world of crime and deception. Kenneth became intensely infatuated with Belinda. He called and emailed her constantly, professing his feelings as if he were a lovesick teenager. Even though they only had a superficial acquaintance, Kenneth told others that Belinda was his girlfriend, leaving Belinda confused. Kenneth was arrested on June 17, 1998, in possession of 25 kilograms of a white substance, which put him at risk of receiving a prison sentence of up to 18 years. However, Kenneth chose to cooperate with the authorities, and his testimony helped convict 12 major criminals. As a result, his own sentence was significantly reduced. Years later, after Kenneth was released from prison, he found himself with nothing. No friends, no money, and his assets had been seized. When faced with these hardships, he moved into a small house with his father, determined to find a way to regain his lost wealth and status. Kenneth, looking to get back into the illicit drug trade, targeted Amarjit Chauhan's company Chiba Freight as the perfect stepping stone for his return. He carefully devised a plan to take control of the company, carrying it out so meticulously that no one suspected anything. Once inside the company, Kenneth learned from co-workers that Amarjit was considering selling Chiba Freight to move abroad. Seizing the opportunity, Kenneth approached Amarjit with a fake story, offering a deal worth $4 million to grab his attention. While Amarjit thought over the proposal, Kenneth continued with his plan, seeking to use Chiba Freight for more than just business. Meanwhile, Kenneth also set his sights on Belinda, who had moved to Devon to escape him during his time in prison. He reached out to her again with a business proposal, knowing she was struggling financially. After her husband left, she was shouldering the responsibilities alone, finding it increasingly difficult to afford her house, the mortgage, and the high costs of sending her children to a private school. When she responded, Kenneth told her about his plan to take over Chiba Freight and suggested she join the company as a director. Despite lacking experience, he offered her a salary of $54,000 for working only 2 days a week, amounting to $68,000 per year. Belinda took advantage of the opportunity and negotiated a higher salary of $72,000, nearly $9,000 more, which Kenneth agreed to without hesitation. Kenneth visited Belinda at her rural home in Devon under the guise of discussing a job. To justify these visits, he made up reasons, such as needing her signature on a document or help with paperwork. However, Kenneth's real interest lay in the land surrounding Belinda's home, an interest that soon became clear. He began to express concerns to Belinda about the condition of the path leading to the house, suggesting various improvements. These included removing certain trees, building a wall with electric gates, and installing a drainage system. At first, it seemed Kenneth was motivated by a desire to beautify the property for Belinda's benefit. But this might not have been his true intention. In February, Amarjeet made a critical decision regarding the future of his company. He chose to engage with buyers to discuss a possible sale. Before leaving, Amarjeet informed his employees that he would be visiting Stonehenge, but gave no further details. Additionally, he promised to keep them personally updated on the progress of the company's sale. Unfortunately, this meeting would be the last time his employees saw him, and his unexplained disappearance soon became a matter of concern. On a Monday morning, the staff of Chiba Freight gathered together, only to be met with a shocking announcement. Kenneth unexpectedly introduced Belinda as the new owner of the company, catching everyone off guard and raising many questions. The employees were left wondering what had happened to Amarjeet, why he hadn't said goodbye, and what the future held for the company. Then, Kenneth presented a letter that he claimed was from Amarjeet. According to the letter, Amarjeet had decided to sell the company due to poor health and was relocating abroad with his family. Notably, the staff confirmed that the signature on the letter belonged to Amarjeet. The company's success and surge in orders left the team too busy to worry about what the future held. As a result, they stopped discussing their concerns and focused on their work. Belinda was given a desk and computer in the office and started studying the company's finances as instructed by Kenneth. However, she felt unwell on her second day and decided to leave for her home in Devon without waiting for Kenneth's approval. When she arrived, she was shocked to see an old, run-down Jaguar parked by the road and two men, William Hornsey and Peter Rees, who were associated with Kenneth, digging a drainage ditch on her property. This unexpected discovery made her extremely uncomfortable. Belinda confronted Kenneth as soon as he arrived at her property, expressing her frustration and anger over the unauthorized excavation work he had done. She told him she didn't need a drainage ditch, but Kenneth claimed that he did it just to surprise her and assured her everything would be sorted out by summer. However, their plans were put on hold when the Metropolitan Police started a new investigation into the situation. In 2003, Kenneth, who had previously been convicted for drug trafficking, was rebuilding his luxurious life. After Amarjeet, the former owner of the Chiba Freight, disappeared, Kenneth took over the company, using it as a cover for his smuggling operation. For 5 years, Kenneth had secretly admired Belinda, and now that she was involved in his operation, it seemed like all his dreams were coming true. But the foundation of his empire was about to be exposed. Ankur Varma, a journalist based in New Zealand, was eagerly awaiting a reunion with his 25-year-old sister, Nancy, who lived in London with her husband, Amarjeet Chauhan, and their 2 young children. This visit was especially significant, as Ankur and Nancy hadn't seen each other in 9 years. Ankur would frequently talk to Nancy and their mother to discuss activities and plan his upcoming visit. However, on February 15, 2003, Ankur attempted to contact Nancy and his mother, but neither of them responded. Initially, he thought they might be on a trip, but as the days passed without any response, Ankur grew increasingly concerned. This was unusual because they had not mentioned any travel plans to him, and his visit was just 5 days away. Concerned for his family's safety, Angkor contacted the Metropolitan Police for help. When police from Scotland Yard visited the family's residence, they found it empty. Neighbors and colleagues speculated that the family might have returned to their home country, India. However, further updates from police at Scotland Yard increased Angkor's anxiety for his sister, mother, and nephews. His concern turned into fear, prompting him to decide on traveling to the UK to personally investigate the disappearance of his family. Upon arrival in London, Angkor felt isolated in an unfamiliar city. He went to the Chauhan household in Hounslow, expecting a warm welcome. Instead, he was shocked by a sight that left him in utter disbelief. At first glance, the home looked normal, as if the family had just stepped out for a moment. But the reality was very different. Closer inspection revealed that the family had been gone for weeks. The laundry was still in the washer, children's toys and baby bottles with leftover food were scattered across the floor and kitchen counter, and food had spoiled. It looked like someone had been interrupted in the middle of washing dishes. While clothes and suitcases were neatly stored away, personal belongings were scattered throughout the three-bedroom house. The refrigerator still had food. But what devastated Angkor the most was finding his mother's cherished prayer book, a possession she always kept close and never left behind. Angkor was confused and worried about his sister's family, who had 2 young children, disappearing without a trace. It seemed unlikely that they had left their home by choice. Angkor convinced the authorities to launch an investigation. A team of experienced detectives from the Serious Crime Division took over the case. As time passed, Angkor lost hope of ever being reunited with his family and that their future plans would no longer be fulfilled. A massive search was launched to find the family of Amarjit Chauhan. The lead detective decided to question the person who last saw Amarjit on the day he disappeared. Kenneth, a former prisoner with suspicious behavior, was the primary suspect. Kenneth tried to convince the police that Amarjit was not a trustworthy man and his financial troubles led him to run away on his own. Kenneth also told the police that Amarjit likely wanted to get rid of his business and was probably in another country by then. However, the investigators did not believe Kenneth's explanation. They used advanced forensic techniques to track the movement of Kenneth and Amarjit's cell phones on the day Amarjit disappeared. The investigation first located Amarjit's phone at his home, which then moved on to Stonehenge where a business meeting was scheduled. It was at Stonehenge that Kenneth's phone connected with Amarjit's. And after that, both phones were tracked moving towards Devon. The detectives' only lead was that Belinda Bruin, the new head of Chiba Freight, lived in Devon, so they decided to pay her a visit. However, when the police talked about plans to search Belinda's piece of land, her partner, Kenneth, intervened. He was furious and tried to convince her not to allow the search, suggesting they meet somewhere else instead. Belinda refused to budge. Meanwhile, Kenneth's aide, William Hornsey, got in touch with the chief detective and claimed he had recently spoken with Amarjit. He said that Amarjit was apparently still in Britain. The authorities agreed to meet in Newport, Wales, near the passport agency, hoping to use this opportunity to uncover the truth behind Amarjit's disappearance. The authorities decided to cancel their plan to search Belinda's piece of land, as they needed to confirm in person that Amarjit was indeed safe to conclude the investigation. However, before the scheduled encounter at the passport agency on Monday, 3 men, Kenneth, William, and Peter, made an unexpected visit to Belinda's estate over the weekend, surprising Belinda. While there, they noticed a damaged path near the stable and decided to repair it with gravel. When a digger was later delivered to her estate, she took her children to the city, leaving the 3 men behind to repair the road. 2 days later, detectives went to the designated site to meet with Amarjit. When they arrived, they saw Hornsey and Kenneth's vehicle appear, stop briefly, and then leave as if the encounter had been cancelled. Kenneth went back to work at Chiba Freight, and the detectives decided to question Belinda again. Before this, Kenneth had warned her not to tell the police about the work he had done on her land. However, Belinda found his warning strange and decided to tell the investigators about it. She explained that some of Kenneth's associates had gone onto her farm without permission and dug a drainage trench, even though she hadn't asked for it. Belinda had unknowingly assisted the police significantly. The detectives quickly traveled to Devon, where they conducted excavations and thorough forensic tests with the help of experts. They searched through a piece of Belinda's land for 5 days, thinking they would find the remains of Amarjit and his family. However, nothing was discovered. After searching for more than 2 months, in April 2003, the police realized that they had been searching in the wrong location. In the popular British holiday town of Bournemouth, Dorset, along the English Channel, a father and son, Dave and Carl, had planned a canoe trip for the evening. The sea was calm, the breeze was refreshing, and the climate ideal for a leisurely paddle. As they made their way through the water, they noticed something large floating in the distance. As they drew closer, they realized it was a badly decomposed body, severely swollen from being in the water for an extended period, making it hard to determine the person's identity. Carl quickly paddled back to shore to alert the authorities while his father, Dave, stayed with the body. Dave was left waiting alone in the darkness for nearly 3 hours as he waited for help to arrive. This harrowing experience would forever be etched in their memories. The body was later taken to a morgue in Bournemouth, but it took almost a week to identify it. The deceased was Amarjit Chauhan, a missing entrepreneur who had suffered severe head injuries and had his mouth taped shut. The autopsy revealed that he likely died from the head trauma and suffocation. His clothes were removed for forensic examination. Meanwhile, police searched for more clues 62 meters away in Belinda's field and made a significant discovery, including a pile of charred clothes, jewelry, and strands of hair that were later confirmed to belong to Amarjit, as well as pieces of children's clothing. Initial investigations suggested that a family of 5 might be buried at the site. The once private property in Devon, owned by Belinda, was secretly used as a burial ground for the Amarjit Chauhan family. When police became suspicious, the bodies were exhumed and taken by boat to the middle of the bay in Bournemouth, where they were dumped into the sea. Until a body was found, the staff at Chiba Freight held on to the hope that their employer might return someday, even if he had sold the business, as they expected him to say goodbye or make a visit in the future. However, all hopes shattered when the drowned man was confirmed as Amarjit. The situation worsened as concern for the remaining family members grew. Nancy was merely 25 years old, and their children were just infants. The thought that someone could extinguish so many innocent lives was harrowing, yet all evidence pointed tragically in that direction. The excavation area was disproportionately large for the concealment of just one corpse. A smaller site would suffice for hiding a single individual. Furthermore, the simultaneous disappearance of Amarjit along with Nancy, mother-in-law Chiranjit, and children, Ravinder and Devinder, suggested a tragic end. The investigation became a high-priority case because of very serious crimes. Kenneth became the main suspect, but he and his accomplice, William, had disappeared. Initial information suggested that Kenneth and William had fled to Europe, leaving their associate Peter Rees. Peter Rees, a 39-year-old, feeling intense guilt over his crime, unexpectedly confessed to a stranger he had just met about the circumstances of the Amarjit family's tragic end. His confession was likely driven by a fear of being blamed entirely, as he couldn't believe his accomplice Kenneth would harm 2 innocent children. The stranger reported this information to the authorities, and Peter was arrested 12 days later. However, once in custody, Peter maintained his silence during police questioning, leaving the whereabouts and fate of the Amarjit Chauhan family a mystery. 3 weeks after the Amarjit body discovery, another body was found in the Solent, a part of the English Channel. Ankur was asked to identify the remains, which he recognized as those of his older sister, Nancy, despite the significant decomposition. The main suspects were eventually caught. Kenneth was arrested in Belgium after 2 months on the run, while William turned himself in 6 weeks later. However, even with the 3 suspects in custody, they refused to cooperate with the investigation. Despite the arrests, the case was still unsolved because 3 members of the Chauhan family were missing and there were no eyewitnesses to their murders. The investigation now needed irrefutable evidence to move forward. The detectives were unaware that Amarjit had left behind a crucial piece of evidence. In April 2005, the longest criminal trial in British history began, with the prosecution aiming to prove that Kenneth, William, and Peter were responsible for the kidnapping and murder of the Chauhan family. Over the course of the 10-month trial, more than 4,500 physical evidence items were examined. However, the analysis of phone communications formed the core of the prosecution's case. Amarjeet had initially met with Kenneth to discuss the sale of the company, but he was kidnapped and held captive at Kenneth's home. There, he was forced to sign documents that would make it seem to his employees that he had sold the business and moved abroad. A significant piece of evidence emerged when the son of William handed over a gray suitcase to the police containing a 4 sheets signed by Amarjeet. Reagan initially planned to kill only Amarjeet, but he realized that this would likely prompt the rest of the family to raise an alarm. As a result, he decided to target the entire family. On the day of the murder, Peter was tasked with keeping an eye on Amarjeet, while Kenneth and another accomplice, William, went to the family's home in London. They stayed there for several hours, but exactly how they killed the other family members remains unclear. Amarjeet was killed at Kenneth's home, which was then thoroughly renovated, including replacing all the furniture to destroy any evidence. 8 months later, a significant breakthrough occurred when forensic scientists re-examined Amarjeet's clothing. They found a folded letter in his right sock. The letter was addressed to Kenneth and dated February 12, 2003, proving that Amarjeet had been at Kenneth's residence on the day he disappeared. Unbeknownst to his killers, Amarjeet had intentionally left behind this clue. This crucial piece of evidence ultimately helped the police in their investigation. A lengthy 9-month trial ended with the jury's unanimous verdict. Peter Rees was sentenced to 23 years in prison for murdering Amarjeet Chauhan. Meanwhile, Kenneth Reagan and William Hornsey each received 5 consecutive life sentences for the murders of Nancy, Chiranjit Kaur, Ravinder, and Devinder, ensuring they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Later, the remains of Chiranjit Kaur, Amarjeet's mother-in-law, were found off the coast of the Isle of Wight. Unfortunately, the bodies of the 2 young children, 18-month-old Devinder and 2-month-old Ravinder, were never recovered. It's often difficult to comprehend how someone could commit such atrocities against children. Typically, individuals who carry out these acts have psychological issues or are unaware of the severity of their actions. However, this was not the case with Kenneth. He was to be mentally sound. For him, the brutal acts he committed were simply a means to achieve his goals, and he showed no hesitation in taking innocent lives in pursuit of his own ambitions. Ankur was profoundly affected by the incident. He now lives in New Zealand, permanently separated from his nephews. A family video recorded just 2 days before they disappeared was found in their empty home. This heartbreaking video is the last remaining testament to a once joyful family torn apart by tragedy. Residents of Santa Claus, Danny and Kim Daniels, were known throughout their community as a warm and generous couple who always had a welcoming smile for everyone. Proud parents to 4 biological children, including Jessica, Brian, and Amber Daniels, Danny and Kim also opened their home to several foster children, providing a nurturing environment for them to thrive. Tragically, the community was unaware that this display of kindness would one day lead to their shocking and horrific demise. Kimberly, known simply as Kim to her loved ones, was born on February 25, 1964 in Georgia, USA. Details about her early life are scarce, but we know she grew up in a large, highly dysfunctional family. Kim faced many challenges from a young age. She became an orphan in her early teens and spent her remaining youth moving from one foster home to another. When Kim turned 18 and aged out of the foster care system, life didn't get any easier. She had 3 children with a man whose identity remains undisclosed. Her first child, Amber, was born around 1986 or 1987 when Kim was in her 20s. Then in January 1989, she welcomed twins, Brian and Brooke. Unfortunately, Kim's troubled childhood took its toll, and her struggles with drug and alcohol addiction led to her losing custody of her children. After hitting rock bottom and being forced to live in her car, Kim decided it was time for a change. In 1992, she joined Alcoholics Anonymous, where she met Danny Daniels. Danny was born on May 21, 1950. and worked for the United States Postal Service. Danny helped Kim overcome her addiction, and their relationship blossomed into love. They married shortly after, and with the stability of their marriage, Kim regained custody of her 3 children. The Daniels family was now complete with Kim, her children Amber, Bryant, Brooke, Danny, and Jessica. A daughter Danny had previously adopted. They moved into a charming brick house in the quaint town of Santa Claus, Georgia, a place with a population of just around 300 known for its Christmas theme. The town's main attraction was its festive spirit, with everything inspired by the legendary figure of Santa Claus. The local chapel was open 24/7, featuring a walking trail in Santa's garden. During the holiday season, residents sent over 1,000 letters and postcards through a large red mailbox labeled as Santa's Mail, located on December 25th Avenue. Other street names in the town were similarly themed, like Sleigh Street and Rudolph Road. The town sign featured a drawing of Santa Claus and the phrase, "The town that loves children," written in beautiful script. The Daniels home boasted a huge fireplace and was nestled between 2 railroad ponds, surrounded by tall pines and vineyards. The Daniels family settled into their new home without any trouble and quickly became devoted members of the Pentecostal church. Kim played the piano and sang in the choir during religious services, while Danny taught Sunday school. Their kids attended the local school. To those who knew them, they epitomized the perfect family, a beautiful home, for children, 2 dogs, a mother dedicated to her family and community, and a father who worked hard for the well-being of his loved ones. Kim and Danny's kindness seemed to know no bounds. By the mid-90s, they had opened their doors as a foster home for children in need. Having experienced the hardships of being homeless herself, Kim felt this was a natural step, and Danny's familiarity with the adoption system made it seem like the logical choice. Over the next few years, social service workers noted that the Daniels took in about 7 children, though some sources suggested the number was much higher. One of the children they took in 1995 was a 10-year-old girl named Joanne. She was placed with the Daniels due to her toxic family environment. Both Joanne's father and stepfather were alcoholics. Various child protection service workers reported that her mother practiced black magic and voodoo. Joanne had an older brother named Jerry Scott Heidler. Born on June 9, 1977, Jerry was described as a kind young man who got along well with children. However, he faced challenges due to his difficult home life. During his high school years, he attended a school for students with emotional and behavioral disorders, and he had a criminal record for stealing from a store and a vehicle. By 1996, he was facing serious charges in the town of Alma and was on probation for driving under the influence. While Joanne was under Kim and Danny's care, Jerry often visited the family home to see her, sometimes even staying overnight. After Joanne returned to her family, Jerry continued to maintain a relationship with the Daniels. Kim and Danny wanted to help him, so they occasionally brought him along to church. This continued for over a year, but by 1997, Danny started noticing that Jerry, then 20 years old, seemed to have a particularly close relationship with his 16-year-old daughter, Jessica, and he wasn't the only one who noticed. Concerned for his daughter's welfare, Danny decided to confront Jerry. He spoke to him seriously, and after this conversation, Jerry no longer visited the Daniels' home or accompanied them to church. In December of that same year, the Daniels were getting ready to celebrate the holiday season. Christmas was Kim's favorite time of the year, a sentiment deeply rooted in her own experiences of spending many Christmas Eves alone during her years in foster care. Because of this, she went out of her way to create the best possible Christmas experience for every child in her home, both her own kids and those temporarily under her care. She spent a good part of the year collecting gifts, which she stored in the attic of the house. This year, the room was packed with toys, video games, movies, and clothes. The holiday decorations began early in December, and by the time the tree was up, it was surrounded by dozens of presents. On the night of December 3, 1997, the Daniels family went to bed after a day like any other. At that time, in addition to their 4 children, they were caring for 3 more foster kids: Amanda, age 9, Corey, age 4, and Gabriel, who was just 10 months old. The two older children had been with the Daniels for several years, and the baby had been in their care since his birth. It was clear the Daniels had grown deeply attached to these kids and were even considering officially adopting them. Sadly, they would never have the chance to fulfill this wish and give these children a permanent home. While the Daniels had started December ready to enjoy the festive season, Jerry was experiencing a completely different situation. On that same December 3rd, he attended the funeral of a baby belonging to a friend of Jerry's named Mary. Around the same time that Danny had forbidden Jerry from getting close to Jessica, Mary had become pregnant. Tragically, 6 months later, she lost the baby. While it was never confirmed whether Jerry was the father or not, the funeral was nonetheless a painful event. After the ceremony, Jerry drowned his sorrows in alcohol at a local bar, where he also played pool for a while. Several hours later, in the early hours of December 4th, Jerry stole a black van from his neighbor and drove to the Daniels' home. The family was completely asleep when Jerry entered the house through a bathroom window. He then headed straight to Kim and Danny's bedroom, where, due to his many previous visits, he was familiar with the layout of the room and knew where the gun cabinet was located. Jerry grabbed a semi-automatic shotgun and loaded it. He then walked out to the back door of the house, holding the gun in one hand, and proceeded to smoke a cigarette before re-entering the house. The sequence of what happened next remains somewhat unclear, as Jerry's own statements did not align with what was later reported during the trial. According to Jerry, he first entered the room where Bryant, one of Kim's biological sons, was sleeping. Without the 8-year-old boy even realizing what was happening, Jerry pointed the rifle at his head and fired. Bryant died instantly. The gunshot woke Jessica, who saw Jerry in the room with the weapon and immediately ran out. Jerry chased her and shot her in the back of the neck just as she entered her parents' bedroom, likely seeking help. Jerry then turned the gun on Kim and Danny, who were still in their bed. The shot aimed at Danny was not very effective, and Danny raised his arms in an attempt to protect himself. Jerry reloaded the rifle and fired for more times at Danny, ultimately ending his life. Although this was the sequence of events Jerry later confessed to, court documents suggest that the first victims were actually Kim and Danny. Jessica was awakened by the loud noise of the gunshots, and then came the tragic end of young Bryant. Regardless of the exact sequence, the harsh reality was that Jerry had cold-bloodedly taken 4 lives without any apparent reason. However, Jerry's criminal actions that night were not yet over. 5 more children remained alive in the house: Amber, Brooke, Amanda, Corey, and Gabriel. Some reports mentioned that Jerry's sister Joanne was with the Daniels at the time of the attack, but court documents clarify that she had not been in the house since her foster care stay in 1995. Jerry went to the room where the 3 girls were sleeping. He told them that a man had broken into the house and that Kim had asked him to take them to safety. The girls, who knew and trusted Jerry, believed him and followed him to the van. Gabriel, the baby, just 10 months old, and Corey, the 4-year-old, were left behind in the house with the bodies of their parents and siblings. Jerry then drove the 3 girls about 15 miles to the Altamaha River. He parked in a secluded area under a bridge and proceeded to sexually abuse 10-year-old Amber. It was not entirely clear if Brooke and Amanda witnessed this heinous attack. After raping the little girl, Jerry threw the gun into the river and continued driving with the 3 girls about 72 miles away from the Daniels' residence. After committing these horrific crimes, Jerry dropped the girls off the vehicle and left them abandoned on a dirt road. He then returned to his mother's house in the town of Alma, where he spent the next few hours sleeping and playing video games with his brother as if nothing had happened. At one point, Jerry asked his brother if he had ever killed someone. Upon receiving a no as an answer, Jerry remarked that doing so made him want to go out and harm more people. While Jerry was living out his twisted fantasies without any apparent remorse, the 3 young girls he had abandoned were walking terrified and shivering through the dirt streets, their nightgowns the only protection against the cold. Around 4 a.m., a local hero and his wife were alerted by their dog's incessant barking. Looking out the window, they saw the 3 defenseless girls in the street, immediately took them in and called the police. The authorities arrived within minutes. Although the girls were in shock, They were coherent enough to tell the police they had been kidnapped from their home in Santa Claus, providing their address. 2 officers were dispatched to the Daniels residence. They arrived at the brick house around 5:10 a.m. on that December 4th. From the street, the silence of the house created a chilling atmosphere. The front door was open, and when no one answered their calls, the officers checked the windows and saw the arm of a young child on the top bunk of a bunk bed. They loudly announced their presence before entering the Daniels residence. With all the lights off and the winter sky still dark, the house was shrouded in shadows. As they moved through the rooms using their flashlights, the officers stumbled upon the horrifying scene of young Bryant, still clutching his teddy bear, his head covered in blood. In the background, they could hear a clock alarm and the cries of a baby. It was Gabriel found in his crib in Kim and Danny's room. There, the police also discovered the body of Jessica. Lying between the hallway and the door and in the bed, Kim and Danny were found deceased. Corey was found hiding under a table in the kitchen, visibly terrified. The officers also noticed that the gun closet was open. The residence was declared a crime scene, and more investigators soon arrived. Suddenly, Santa Claus, a town where everyone knew each other and which prided itself on being the town that loves children, became the center of a quadruple murder and the abduction of 3 minors. This drew a rapid influx of journalists. The county prosecutor told the press that while the motive for the attack was not yet clear, it was not believed to be random. They were almost certain that the perpetrator was a friend of the Daniels, or at least someone who knew them. The scene was meticulously photographed and videotaped. Forensic technicians collected samples, vacuumed for traces of hair fibers and clothing, and found shotgun shells scattered throughout the house. There were 2 near Jessica, one in the main bathroom, another in Kim and Danny's bedroom, one in the laundry room, one in Brian's room, and another near the sofa in the living room. A neighbor reported hearing strange noises around 1:45 a.m., but given the large distance between the houses and the general quiet of the area, did not think they could be gunshots. According to the coroner who responded to the case, Kim had received 2 shots in the stomach and arm. Danny had 4 wounds on his body and 1 in the head, which was fatal. Jessica died from a single shot in the neck, as did Bryant in the head. Although the deaths of the 2 children were instantaneous, the coroner mentioned it was possible that the 2 adults may have lingered a bit longer before dying. A cigarette butt was also found crushed against the floor near the back door. From the bathroom window, a fingerprint was collected, and these 2 pieces of evidence would help identify the perpetrator of the brutal crime. However, what the forensics team did not yet know was that over 25 miles away at another police station, the 3 girls had already identified the culprit. Amber, Brooke, and Amanda had described the van, and authorities quickly distributed bulletins with all the relevant information, noting that the suspect might be armed and dangerous. The eldest of the 3 girls, Amber, was taken to an interrogation room where a police officer showed her a series of photographs and asked if she recognized anyone. Without hesitation, Amber pointed to Jerry. The other girls also identified him. When the police asked Amber if Jerry had harmed any of the 3, she broke down and started crying inconsolably. It wasn't until a worker from the Department of Children and Family Services was called that the young victim was able to recount what had happened without any other officers present. The story of sexual abuse was corroborated by evidence of physical trauma found on Amber's body. This, combined with DNA evidence found at the scene that matched Jerry, made him the primary and only suspect in the heinous crime. Uniformed patrol officers were deployed throughout the county, where Jerry was last seen, and also in Alma, where his family lived. The search was brief and straightforward. 2 officers were sent to Jerry's family residence. Behind the house, they located the van, and as the patrol car stopped in front of the residence, Jerry was seen exiting the front door. Seeing the 2 agents, he ran back inside the house. The officers pursued him while calling for backup over the radio. Jerry's brother came out and claimed he was the only one at home at that moment, which was clearly a lie. Soon, Bacon County detectives arrived as reinforcements and started a thorough search of the property. Jerry had hidden in a crawl space under the house. When he refused to come out, 2 officers dragged him out and arrested him on an outstanding warrant for violating his parole. Jerry's brother was arrested for obstructing justice, and both were jailed without bail. Despite resisting arrest, once at the station, Jerry confessed to committing the crimes. He recounted what happened that night and admitted to disposing of the weapon in the river, which was confirmed by the young victims. The motive was never definitively established. Jerry himself said he did not know why he had done it. Some speculated that the attack was a result of Danny forbidding him from seeing Jessica, while others believed it might have been related to the grief over losing Mary's baby, who was likely Jerry's child. In his statement, Jerry said he remembered the events as if he had been in a dream. Jerry's entire confession, which included the kidnapping of the 3 girls and the abuse of Amber, was recorded on video. On December 8, 1997, just weeks before Christmas, funeral services for the 4 victims were held. After the ceremony, Danny, Kim, Jessica, and Bryant were laid to rest side by side. Although the evidence was more than sufficient, and Jerry had confessed to his crimes when it came time to plead at the trial, he remained silent. Without a plea of guilty or innocent, the court clerk automatically entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. As a result, a trial had to proceed, which was not scheduled until mid-1999. On July 6th of that year, while waiting for his trial to begin, Jerry managed to escape from his cell by sawing through the bars of his window. He was on the run for 12 hours before being recaptured and returned to jail. During a search of his cell, authorities found 75 homemade weapons and learned that he often threatened guards and other inmates. After this incident, his trial finally started on August 30th, 1999. The prosecution presented videos and photographs of the crime scene showing the condition in which the victims were found. Jerry kept his head down, refusing to look at the outcome of his actions. They also played the video of Amber's testimony, recounting everything that happened that tragic morning. Her words brought tears to the eyes of the Daniels relatives and friends present, and even some jury members were moved. Additionally, Jerry's recorded confession was played, and the 2 officers who conducted the interrogation testified about his statements. Forensic doctors who examined the bodies testified about the number of gunshot wounds each family member received and the estimated time of death for each. A firearms expert testified that the shotgun used in the attack had a capacity for only 6 cartridges, indicating that the perpetrator must have reloaded at least once, given the number of wounds and cartridges found at the scene. The prosecutor suggested several possible motives for the murders, with the main hypothesis being that Jerry was angry over being prohibited from seeing Jessica. The defense, on the other hand, pleaded guilty but requested a verdict of insanity to avoid the death penalty. As part of the strategy, 3 court-appointed experts were required to examine the accused mental state before the trial. During the trial, the court allowed, despite the prosecution's objections, 3 doctors who had interviewed Jerry to testify as witnesses regarding his mental health. The 3 appointed experts testified that the defendant did not suffer from any mental retardation, and his IQ was in the lower average range. They diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder, possibly accompanied by antisocial personality disorder. However, they stated that Jerry had not shown signs of a psychotic break and was responsible for his actions. They added that the accused was a drug addict and could experience hallucinations during periods of use. They agreed that he had the mental capacity to stand trial and that there was sufficient clinical documentation to consider a guilty verdict, but not for mental illness. The first phase of the trial concluded with a unanimous verdict of guilt. The jury found Jerry guilty of 4 counts of murder with malice of forethought, 3 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of kidnapping causing bodily harm, 1 count of aggravated sodomy, 1 count of aggravated child sexual abuse, another of child abuse, and 1 of burglary. During the sentencing phase, the prosecution presented 5 witnesses to demonstrate that Jerry was an unstable and dangerous individual. The first was a police officer who testified about finding an iron bar hidden in the defendant's prison uniform during an inspection. Next, a guard from the detention center where Jerry had been incarcerated testified that he had heard Jerry say he had not finished collecting souls. A jailer from the same facility testified that the accused had tampered with the locks on his cell door and had fashioned a weapon with which he had threatened several prison officials. This testimony was corroborated by a jail administrator who added that Jerry had escaped from the center for 12 hours just days before the trial. Finally, a prosecutor from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation testified that he had received a taunting call from the accused while in prison, in which Jerry said that of the 9 little pigs, "for we're dead," referencing the Daniels. In response, the defense called Jerry's mother to the stand. She spoke about her son's upbringing and mental health, noting that his father was an alcoholic and she had left him when Jerry was 4 years old. Following her, Jerry's sister testified. Lisa also spoke about their childhood, detailing how their family frequently moved, their father and stepfather's excessive drinking, and the latter's verbal abuse. Additionally, the director of programs at the Georgia Department of Juvenile Justice testified. He had managed Jerry's family's case and mentioned that Jerry had entered the juvenile justice system at 14 or 15 years old after a confrontation with his stepfather. William Wright, a social services worker, testified that he had been in contact with the family in 1985 and had noted that Jerry's mother showed little affection towards her son. Jerry's foster mother from August 1988 to March 1989 recalled that the 11-year-old Jerry was afraid of the dark and irrationally feared that a knife might fall from the ceiling and cut him. Another doctor contacted by the defense team to assess Jerry agreed with the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. On September 4, 1999, nearly 2 years after the gruesome murder of the 4 Daniels family members, the jury found aggravating circumstances and recommended the death penalty for each of the 4 counts of murder with malice aforethought. Jerry was also sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for aggravated sodomy and kidnapping causing bodily harm, 30 consecutive years for aggravated child abuse, and 20 consecutive years for each of the remaining charges. After hearing his sentence, Jerry cried, showing emotion for the first time. The judge followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced 22-year-old Jerry to death by electric chair. The sentence was automatically appealed according to state laws, but was upheld by the Supreme Court of Georgia. Since then, Jerry has continued to appeal his case multiple times. He argues that his trial attorney was ineffective in investigating and presenting evidence regarding his mental health during the guilt phase of his trial. However, an internal investigation revealed that the defense team had exhausted all available avenues to secure a life sentence for Jerry, despite encountering numerous obstacles during the case construction. In 2001, the Supreme Court of the United States denied Jerry's request for a procedure used by higher courts to correct an error made by a lower court. The most recent appeal was made in 2023. Like all previous instances, the request was denied and the sentence was reaffirmed. As of the date of this video, Jerry is being held in the Georgia State Prison. Despite the years that have passed, the terrible events of that December morning in 1997 remain vivid in the memory of the residents of Santa Claus, a peaceful and picturesque town that loves Christmas. The case of Dorene Herbert. Dorene Herbert was born on November 29, 1952 in California into a family of 5 children. From a young age, she was a kind and positive person, always looking for ways to help others. After graduating from college, Dorene moved to San Francisco and began working as a physical therapist. At the age of 24, she met Michael Venice, a man who worked in a factory near Dorene's clinic. After getting to know each other for a while, Dorene and Michael started dating, and a few months later they decided to get married. In 1976, they had a son named Paul. Initially, Michael and Dorene's life was very happy, but after having a child, their relationship began to have problems. After about a year, Dorene and Michael decided to divorce. Their son was raised by Dorene, while Michael was still allowed to visit him regularly. Despite the divorce, Michael and Dorene maintained a cordial relationship. A year later, Dorene met a man named Charles. They began dating, got married, and decided to move to San Jose, settling in a quiet residential area. In 1979, their daughter Deanna was born. Charles, like his wife, dreamed of having a large family. He was overjoyed when their daughter was born. However, tragedy struck the family in February 1980. 4-year-old Paul climbed over the fence around the pool and fell into the water. Dorene, who was home at the time, realized what had happened too late. She pulled her son out of the water and called an ambulance. Paul was taken to the hospital and put on life support. However, after 10 days, doctors concluded that there was no chance of survival. The decision was made to disconnect the boy from the machines. Dorene became depressed and devastated, blaming herself constantly, even though the police concluded that it was not her fault. However, Dorene's young daughter Deanna helped her through this pain. 4 years after the tragic event, Dorene's family finally had some good news. Dorene and Charles had been trying for another child, although they had failed twice due to interrupted pregnancies. But Dorene finally became pregnant again, and this time, everything went well. They were expecting a new baby boy due in early November. A few days before Dorene was to be admitted to the hospital, her family decided to join in the Halloween festivities. On the evening of October 31st, all the neighbors decorated their houses and handed out candy to the children. Deanna, who was 4 years old at the time, was very keen to join in, and her parents couldn't say no. Although Dorene was 9 months pregnant, she went trick-or-treating with her daughter while Charles stayed home, handing out candy to other children. The mother and daughter returned home just before 9 p.m. Charles informed his wife that they were running out of candy and that he planned to drive to the nearest store to buy more. He left the house around 8:50 p.m. and returned about 15 minutes later. As he approached the house, Charles noticed that the front door was slightly ajar, which he found strange. When he entered, he found his wife lying on the hallway floor, surrounded by a large amount of blood. Dorene showed no signs of life, and Charles immediately called 911. Shortly thereafter, he noticed the body of their unborn child in the living room. Charles was in a state of shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. Initially, he thought that Dorene might have had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized that the situation was much worse. Beside the child was a human hand, and Charles immediately understood that it was Dorene's hand. When Charles realized that his family was being attacked, he began searching for Deanna, fearing she might be in danger. He saw so much blood on the floor that he slipped and fell while running through the house. Luckily, Deanna was still alive, but she was hiding behind the sofa in the living room out of fear. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics found Dorene and discovered that she had a weak pulse. They rushed her to the hospital, but unfortunately, doctors were unable to save her, and she died in the ambulance. Tragically, Dorene's unborn child also died from the brutal attack. Medical experts examined Dorene's body and concluded that she had been repeatedly hit with a long, sharp object like a sword or machete. The police investigated the house and found a horrifying scene that looked like something out of a horror movie. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, and even on the ceiling. Several police officers sought psychological help after witnessing the horrific scene. Investigators searched the entire house but found no perpetrator or any clues about the attacker. While investigating the murder, police found significant evidence outside the house. They saw bloody footprints on the sidewalk and suspected that the killer had left the scene in a vehicle. While searching for more clues, police found a blood-stained wolf mask on the front lawn. They believed the mask might have belonged to the killer, as family members said they had never owned it. The mask was sent to a lab for analysis. Police then spoke to Deanna, the only surviving child from the murder. She was in shock but still able to talk. She told police that after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. Her mother, Dorene, opened the door and saw a man wearing a wolf mask holding a knife. The attacker said, "I'm going to kill you now." Dorene screamed, telling her daughter to run away from the house immediately. Deanna hid behind the sofa but could not remember what happened next. It was not until her father found her that Deanna calmed down. Unfortunately, Deanna was unable to provide any further information about the attacker as he had hidden his identity behind the wolf mask. Investigators initially suspected Dorene's husband, Charles, as the prime suspect. Since he had been out of the house around the time Dorene was attacked, they were suspicious of his trip to the store. When Charles returned, he had stepped in blood several times and even fallen, ending up covered in blood. But the police did not know whether he had done this on purpose to explain the bloodstains on his clothes. However, detectives found several problems with this theory. First, Charles's shoes did not match the ones that left bloody footprints on the road. Second, there were no traces of blood found in Charles's car, nor were there any other shoe prints. To clarify the information, the police went to the store that Charles visited and confirmed the time he was there. The employee confirmed that Charles had bought candy at the store that evening. This indicated that he did not have enough time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage also confirmed that Charles was at the store. Therefore, the police no longer considered him the prime suspect. First, they asked Charles if he could think of anyone who might want to harm his family, and Charles immediately mentioned Dorene's ex-husband, Michael. Charles said that initially, Michael maintained a normal relationship with his ex-wife. However, things changed after the death of their son. Michael believed that Dorene had intentionally killed the child to cut off all contact with him. Michael even filed a civil lawsuit against her, but he lost the case. Dorene thought that there was a reason behind the change in Michael's behavior. He had a history of depression after the birth of his son and was distant from both his wife and child. All of this made Michael introverted and caused communication problems. These problems became one of the main reasons why Michael and Dorene decided to divorce. Later, when Dorene married Charles, Michael began to harbor resentment and hostility towards her. This became even more apparent when Michael began to truly hate his ex-wife. Later, Michael lost his job at the place where he had spent most of his life. This created many negative issues in his life. After hearing all this information, the detectives decided to go to Michael's house and talk to him. Although Charles's testimony was not enough to make Michael the prime suspect, since he lived only 2 miles from Dorene's house, they decided to visit him immediately. Around midnight, the police arrived at Michael's house and saw a pickup truck parked near the garage. When they shined a flashlight inside the car, they saw what appeared to be blood on the steering wheel and keys. They then knocked on Michael's door, but no one answered. The lights were on inside the house, and the police could hear water running inside, which made them suspect that Michael might be destroying evidence or washing bloody clothes. So they continued knocking. Michael finally opened the door. He remained calm even after being informed of his ex-wife's murder. Michael answered all the police's questions calmly and allowed them into his home without a warrant. According to him, he had gone to the store during the day, returned home, and had not left since. Michael even signed a form giving the police permission to search his home. As he reached for a pen to sign, the investigators noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael explained that he had accidentally cut himself earlier while carving pumpkins for Halloween. However, the police were skeptical. The wound was still fresh, and blood was still oozing from it. As several police officers began searching Michael's home, he was asked to go upstairs with an officer to show his identification. However, when he entered the bedroom, Michael's actions aroused suspicion as he appeared to be reaching under the bed. The officer asked him to move away and found a loaded gun holster under the headboard. After discovering the weapon, the police took Michael downstairs to meet with other officers. Their colleagues discovered other suspicious evidence. They found drops of blood on the floor, which led them to the garage, where there was a washing machine and bloody clothing. Based on this evidence, the police had enough to arrest Michael. Detectives and forensic experts investigated Michael's home, looking for more evidence that could connect him to the murder. Police are awaiting the results of blood analysis and have discovered other grisly signs. Initially, the police discovered an empty box containing an 18-inch machete. Medical experts determined that the shape of the knife matched the wound on Dorene's body perfectly. In addition, the police found 2 makeshift coffins in Michael's home, raising suspicions that they might be for Dorene and Charles. They also found mortuary bags, the type typically used by paramedics, in Michael's home. The presence of these items made the police question Michael's innocence. After compiling all this evidence, the police decided to apply for a warrant for Michael's arrest. Without a warrant, they could only detain him for a limited time. However, the judge said that the evidence they had gathered was not strong enough and that there were many unknowns. As a result, Michael was released and he was freed. 3 days into the investigation, detectives received lab results. The results showed that there were 2 different blood types at the crime scene. The majority of the blood matched Dorene's blood type, while a small amount matched Michael's. This indicated that Michael had injured himself during the attack on his ex-wife. The judge quickly issued an arrest warrant, and Michael was charged with the murder of his ex-wife and her unborn child. Detectives continued their investigation and found additional evidence linking Michael to the crime. When they spoke to acquaintances of Michael, they learned that he owned the wolf mask found near Dorene's house. They also found a photo of Michael wearing the mask at a previous Halloween party. To further solidify the case, police found the mask Michael wore in the photo in his home. Michael's trial began in July 1988, 4 years after Dorene's murder. He initially admitted to the crime but later changed his story. He did not deny the murder but claimed he was innocent by reason of mental illness. A psychologist assigned to monitor him concluded that he did have serious mental illness. According to Michael, he became insane on Halloween night when he saw other children trick-or-treating. This reminded him of Paul's death and caused him to collapse. He said that he went to Dorene's house that night with a machete. When she opened the door, he said, "You killed my son," and that he intended to kill her. She immediately recognized the man behind the mask, shouted at her daughter to run, and the next second, Michael attacked her. However, Michael's story had one twist. He said he did not know Dorene was pregnant. This raised suspicions as all her friends claimed that she was clearly pregnant before the tragedy. They even joked that Dorene had become even bigger because of her pregnancy. The murder of Dorene and her unborn child came to light at a trial. The prosecution argued that Michael was fully aware of his actions and had planned to kill his ex-wife and her husband. He had told his friends about this desire, and detectives found evidence that he had made elaborate preparations, including 2 coffins and body bags, in his home. However, it appears that he changed his mind and did not carry out his murder plan. This led the prosecution to suspect that he may have feared being caught or discovered. One of the key witnesses in the case was Dorene's daughter, Deanna. She was only 9 years old at the time and still remembers what happened. After a year of investigation and trial, Michael was convicted of murder. He was sentenced to death, but before his execution, the state of California imposed a moratorium on executions. Therefore, Michael remains in custody and his sentence may not be carried out anytime soon. The case left a deep mark on Deanna's life. Years later, she was still haunted by the horrific memories of her mother's death. However, she decided to forgive Michael and try to forget the past. In 1979, what was supposed to be a fun day at the pool for a 12-year-old girl turned into a painful murder investigation spanning over 4 decades. And this is the oldest cold case finally solved in 2022, the Lacia Michelle Jackson case. Justice has finally been served for this young girl's death by the help of more modern investigative techniques, the unrelenting support of her family, and enough dogged determination displayed by the police force to move mountains. So stay tuned to learn all the details. Conroe, Texas is where we begin Lacia's story. It is located in Montgomery County, Texas, just around a 40-mile shy of Houston. It's a quaint small town with a lot of charm. This was home to Lacia Jackson, along with her mother, Laura Kay, stepfather, Charles Hirsch, stepbrother Kirk Hirsch, and 2 biological brothers named Sean and Larry. She was a thriving student attending Washington Junior High. She had blonde hair and was known for wearing her light blue-rimmed glasses, which were her trademark. September 7th, 1979 was a warm, beautiful day. Wildwood Lake and its nearby swimming pool area were common hangout spots for families, kids, and teens. On this particular day, 12-year-old Lacia, as well as her 2 older brothers, Sean and Larry, were headed there to cool off and hang out. Their cousins and a few close friends also joined them on their fun in the sun excursion. In the 1970s, thoughts on day-to-day safety were very different than they are now. Back then, it was normal for children to walk places alone or with friends, to hitchhike with strangers, or to visit others' homes unsupervised. Mobile phones were not around yet, so add on the additional hurdle of not having constant contact. The group had a wonderful day swimming and goofing off until before they knew it, sunset was fast approaching at about 7 p.m. Not wanting to miss curfew or to be late for dinner, everyone decided to wrap things up and began to head home. Lacia, however, was having too much fun and didn't want to go home yet. Her 2 brothers, Sean and Larry, knew that the swimming area was generally known to be safe by the community, so they began to trek home without their sister. The trio's mother, Laura Kay, noticed that only the boys walked through the front door and promptly asked them where their sister was. They told her that they assumed that she would follow close behind them and be home within the hour. This understandably left a bad taste in Laura's mouth, as it would for any concerned parent. After a short while with no sign of Lacia's return home, her stepfather, Charles Hirsch, decided to take action. He was worried, but not yet concerned, that she might be in any danger. He walked over to the swimming pool area to find her and tell her to come home. But the longer he looked, the sooner he realized that there was no sign of his daughter. Parental adrenaline kicked in for Charles and Laura, and they took the initial search efforts into their own hands. They drove the streets of the subdivision where the swimming area was located and kept their eyes out for their daughter. When that search came up short, they took the next step of stopping by the houses of family and friends to ask if anyone had seen or heard from her, particularly the ones that had been with her earlier that day. Once they found that she was no longer with any of them either, the realization washed over them. Their daughter was missing. Lacia Jackson was reported missing to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff's Deputy L.B. Robinson was quickly assigned to the case given the urgency of a missing child. A boy by the name of Bobby Hill was one of the first people to be interviewed by the detective. He was a friend of Lacia's who was the last to have seen her. He claimed that before the group left without her, he had last seen Lacia sitting on the pier wearing a pink swimsuit with either a white or yellow shirt and blue shorts with red trim on top of it. He also recalled that while walking home from the lake, he and his friends noticed a brown Monte Carlo passed by them several times, driving erratically on the road and nearly hitting them. This suspicious incident set off alarm bells for Detective Robinson. After questioning Lacia's brothers, cousins, and other friends and family, they headed down to the swimming area to search for any clues as to her whereabouts. The search came up short, and they soon made the understandable assumption that she may very well have been abducted by the man driving the brown car. Then and there, the detective called headquarters for additional backup, as this now might be upgraded to an abduction case. As word spread of Lacia's disappearance around the small town, the police force soon realized how loved this girl was. As many community members, alongside the family, and nearly 24 volunteers from the local fire department helped join the search. The group searched far and wide until 12 a.m. that night, still finding virtually no trace of Lacia in or around town. The next day, as the hunt continued, the Sheriff's Marine Division came forward, wanting to make sure they covered all investigative bases before assuming that Lacia had been abducted. For one, it was possible that she could have drowned in the swimming area. The kids were all there unsupervised. They conducted a thorough search of the swimming area, lake, pier, and woods, and still no sign of Lacia. Kirk Hirsch, Lacia's older stepbrother, was the first one to come across a clue. Looking for his sister, he was combing the corner of Creekwood Street and Deep Forest Drive, 2 blocks away from where Lacia was last seen, when he found something lying in the road, a pair of black, thick, rimmed glasses. They were damaged, comparable to damage a pair of glasses would receive if they were hit by a vehicle. Kirk and his family knew that they belonged to Lacia. The family sought help from the family optometrist that prescribed her glasses, and they later positively identified the pair as having belonged to Lacia. This was blood-chilling news for the family. They now had to prepare for the outcome that they most feared. September 13th, a little less than a week after Lacia went missing, an Exxon Gas Company employee by the name of James Wiley Dawson was out on a special assignment and had been sent out to fix a pipeline problem along Exxon Road. This road was just about a half-mile away from the lake. As soon as he arrived, he noted the overwhelming smell of decomposition in the air, but his mind went to it being that of just a dead animal. The smell proved to be too distracting, and he prioritized finding the dead animal. However, instead of a dead animal, James Dawson stumbled upon what looked to be a nude, heavily decomposed body of a girl. He immediately called the city police, and detectives rushed to the scene. Texas is notoriously scorching hot and humid at that time of year, so the body was in advanced stages of decomposition. They had to act fast to collect evidence. Officers knew that this could very well be the body of Lacia, but they had to be sure. They secured the crime scene and collected all available evidence from the body and nearby area, including the tracks found around the site. As the investigation continued at the crime scene, everyone soon got the news that they had been dreading. Near the body, clothes matching the description of the alleged outfit that the young girl was last seen in were found scattered near her nude body. It was then and later through DNA testing that they confirmed the remains to be of Lacia Michelle Jackson. This was a devastating find for the police, but of course more notably for her heartbroken family and friends. The later autopsy revealed that Lacia had met a brutal end. She showed signs of sexual assault as semen samples were found on her shirt. Signs of strangulation were also found, which was revealed to be her eventual cause of death. While her signature blue glasses were of course not with her, her favorite gold butterfly necklace was still around her neck when she died. Lacia Marie Jackson was soon laid to rest in a private ceremony by her family and friends. Her mourning family soon moved away from Conroe, even leaving Montgomery County altogether, as the memories of their lost loved one proved to be too painful to relive every day. After their departure, the abduction and murder case remained open. Police were determined to bring Lacia and her family justice. A phone line for tips was opened, and police encouraged anyone with information that might be helpful to the case to call it in. One tip was especially interesting to police. It involved a man, a Vietnam veteran, and a known heroin addict. When questioned, the tipster confirmed that many who knew this man witnessed him give intimate details of the crime to others, details that could not have been known to the public. He also apparently often asked his friends to set him up with local girls. Shockingly, he did not mean grown women around his age, but rather young girls. Police were on high alert. Using the information given by the tipster, they eventually got their hands on this man and arrested him on suspicion of murder. They used typical police techniques of interrogation until he broke. He confessed to the crime, but there was a twist. He claimed that he had an accomplice who aided him in the murder of Lacia Jackson. The man gave information about his accomplice to police, and before long both men were in custody and undergoing intense questioning. Police obtained search warrants for both of their homes and conducted thorough searches where they found red fibers. These fibers were similar to those found on Lacia's shorts on the day that she was killed. This was the physical evidence that police needed to nab these two on the charges of murder, especially since they already had a signed written confession given by the Vietnam veteran suspect. However, yet another twist was to come. After the red fibers were found in their homes, the suspect who signed the confession claimed that police had coerced the written confession from him. He went on to further claim police brutality while he was in jail awaiting questioning. These claims were taken seriously, as even people under arrest have legal rights, and soon the FBI stepped in to perform a more thorough investigation. Officers adamantly denied the claims of police brutality and coercion, but it proved to be too late, as a court case was already in the works. Unfortunately, due to the claims in the court case to follow, all evidence found by investigators such as the written confession and red fibers could no longer be upheld in court. This rendered the very damning evidence useless. In the end, the judge also ruled that the charge of murder was to be dropped for both suspects. These two men were released without so much as a warning, which was once again a devastating blow to Lacia's family and the investigators. They were now back to the drawing board, and as years and decades went by, the case got colder and colder. Decades later, in the year 2006, a man by the name of Tommy Deroy joined the police force in Texas, eventually earning the title of detective on the cold case squad. Deroy was actually a former schoolmate of Lacia's, and although he claims to not have known her personally, the case was to home for him, and he yearned to give the Jackson family closure after all this time and mourning. Alongside another cold case investigator on the force named Detective Terrence Greenwood, the work and diving back into this case began. Tommy Deroy knew that some 40 years had passed since the murder. DNA technology had improved greatly since the original investigation, which meant there was better hope for the matching of a suspect. Perhaps it was the two men that his predecessors let slip away all those years ago. Deroy sent the semen and other samples found on Lacia's clothing back in for DNA testing. His hopes were crushed as the samples still could not be matched to any known criminals already listed on the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS. The samples were decades old, and not able to be processed to the fullest extent any longer. Witnesses from that day in September 1979 had moved away, moved on, passed away, or forgotten the details of that fateful day. Lacia's family had already moved far away from Texas at this point in an attempt to move on. All of this meant that they had to find other key evidence to solve this crime all on their own. The clock had been ticking for far too long and hope was dwindling. Recently, in 2018, Courtney Fisher, a reporter with ABC 13, re-sparked public interest in the cold case of Lacia Jackson. Her report reminded cold case investigators that times have changed and that newer forensic DNA techniques were now available and were helping solve crimes left and right. In 2022, the police took her advice. There is a modern technology that goes by the name of MVAC. This method describes a process in which DNA-free buffers are sprayed directly onto surfaces that are being tested, followed by vacuum pressure then being applied in order to collect the best possible DNA sample. This technology is a major breakthrough and can collect far better samples than the ones collected by typical swabbing. Everyone's fingers were crossed that this could be the turning point in the case. In October of 2021, the MVAC method was put to the test by the Montgomery County Cold Case Homicide Squad, retesting DNA found on Lacia's shirt from 1979. And just like that, 43 years after the murder, a DNA match for the killer was found. The DNA sample was entered into the FBI's CODIS system, and finally, it came back as a 100% match to a man named Gerald Dwight Casey. Detectives made yet another shocking discovery at this time, as it turns out that this man was well known by police already. Casey was a known felon who had many convictions for burglary, assault on a police officer, possession of heroin, and marijuana. Shockingly, but perhaps unsurprisingly, Gerald Dwight Casey had also already been convicted of capital murder once before. He was convicted in 1991 for a murder committed in 1989, 10 years after he had murdered Lacia Jackson. He had been executed by lethal injection in Texas on April 18, 2002 at 47 years old. To confirm his guilt, investigators compared the DNA found on Lacia's shirt to a blood sample taken from Casey prior to his state execution, and the 100% match was confirmed yet again. This man was Lacia's killer. As he exited death row after his long stint in prison and headed for the lethal injection chamber, Casey declined to share any last words. He apparently was unremorseful, and no one knew at the time what other atrocities he had committed before he died. Gerald Dwight Casey did not survive to receive proper punishment for what he did to Lacia Michelle Jackson, but at least he had been punished and is no longer able to hurt anyone else. While discovering who killed Lacia was a momentous occasion, it of course remained bittersweet news for Lacia's family and friends. They thanked the police force for never giving up on her, but often declined to speak publicly about the case any longer, since they had made peace with the outcome. They remain mostly anonymous to this day. The Montgomery County Sheriff's Office had now solved and closed its oldest cold case in the county. Modern advancements in DNA research, persistent detective work, and decades of hope solved this case. Justice was served cold, and it was served for a different murder. Whether you believe in karma, fate, an afterlife, or a spiritual deity, it is safe to say that one can hope that Gerald Casey is receiving his cosmic punishment wherever he is now, and that Lacia Jackson can finally rest peacefully. And there are all of the details. While this murderer went to his grave with the secret that he had assaulted and murdered an innocent 12-year-old girl, justice still prevailed. Advancements in forensic technology will mean that more and more killers will be brought to justice. The case of Ollie Kemp. Alexandra Ollie Elizabeth Kemp was born October 11, 1982, in Leawood. She was the oldest of 3 children and the only daughter of her parents. After graduating high school with honors, Alexandra enrolled at Kansas State University. Following her freshman year, she returned to her hometown of Leawood for summer break. During her break, Alexandra took a part-time job at a local outdoor swimming pool near her parents' house, where her younger brother Tyler already worked. The pool was a quiet neighborhood spot, catering mainly to local residents, and it still operates today. On June 18, 2002, Alexandra reported to work on an overcast day because resulted in fewer visitors than usual. At 5 p.m., Tyler arrived at the pool to start his shift, but his sister Alexandra was nowhere to be found. Her phone and purse were still on the table where she usually sat, which made Tyler confused and worried. He immediately called his parents to report that Alexandra had vanished. Their father, Roger Kemp, rushed to the scene and began searching for his daughter. He first checked the pool, but it was empty. Next, he went to the small pump room near the pool, which contained equipment for water purification, a ladder, and other items. Upon entering the pump room, Roger didn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. However, he soon noticed a leg protruding from under a tarp. As he lifted the tarp, he was met with a horrific sight. His daughter Alexandra, brutally beaten and naked from the waist down, with multiple bruises on her face and body. Roger quickly called 911 and spoke with the operator. When the ambulance arrived, Roger was performing CPR on his daughter. The paramedics took Alexandra to the hospital, but despite their best efforts, she sadly did not survive. Alexandra was declared dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. An examination revealed that the cause of death was strangulation despite the presence of multiple severe injuries. A thorough investigation found no evidence of forced intimacy, although her body was partially unclothed. The police collected DNA samples from Alexandra's body and secured the pool area, searching for clues to identify the perpetrator. Evidence of a struggle was evident in the room where Roger discovered Alexandra's body, including her flip-flops found in separate locations. Additionally, an open bottle of antiseptic gel and its cap were found at the scene. A few days later, while the police continued to investigate, Alexandra's family and hundreds of mourners gathered to pay their respects at a funeral ceremony. Phil Howes, Alexandra's boyfriend since high school, was initially suspected in her death. As a pool administrator, he worked the morning shift on the day of her death, and Alexandra arrived at noon to start her 5-hour shift. Although Phil often stayed after work to spend time with Alexandra, he left promptly after his shift that day because they had plans for the evening. Despite being an early suspect, Phil had a solid alibi and was quickly cleared by the police. In an interview with detectives, Phil mentioned that Alexandra often felt uncomfortable being alone at work because some of the lawn maintenance workers would stare at her and try to flirt. The police investigated the lawn workers, but each of them had an alibi. However, the inquiry wasn't entirely fruitless. Several workers reported seeing a suspicious man with a video camera lurking in the bushes near the pool the day before Alexandra's death, apparently watching the female lifeguards in swimsuits. The police were given conflicting reports about Alexandra's final hours. Some people said she left the scene in an old Ford pickup truck, while others mentioned different circumstances. A study of Alexandra's mobile phone activity revealed that she had made plans with a friend, Laurel, to meet on the day she died. However, Alexandra didn't show up. When Laurel went to the police station to give her account of events, she explained that Alexandra had asked her to come to the pool to keep her company until her shift ended. According to Laurel, the pool was empty that day due to the poor weather, which made Alexandra anxious. When Laurel arrived at the pool at around 2:30 p.m., she didn't see Alexandra anywhere. Instead, a man she didn't know emerged from the pool house and waved at her with a smile. Laurel thought this man might be Alexandra's boss, and she decided to leave so as not to get her friend in trouble for socializing during work hours. At the time, she had no reason to think that anything was amiss. Police investigation led them away from Alexandra's workplace and to a completely different suspect. As a witness, Laurel provided a detailed description of the person she believed committed the crime. The police used this description to create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white man around 30 years old with a stocky build, short brown hair, and driving a 1980 Ford pickup truck. The suspect's identity was narrowed down when someone recognized the description as matching James Strader, a local mechanic who owned an old Ford pickup truck. James was questioned by the police and appeared to match the sketch, but he denied any involvement in Alexandra's death. His employer verified his alibi, stating that James was at work on the day of the murder. As a result, James was released from custody. While the police had eliminated James as a suspect, forensic analysis of evidence collected from the crime scene revealed male DNA on an antiseptic gel tube and on Alexandra's body. Unfortunately, the DNA did not match anyone in the police database, leaving the case still unsolved. Alexandra's family, friends, and boyfriend were ruled out as suspects after DNA tests showed no match with the DNA samples found on her body. The investigation was driven by Alexandra's father, Roger Kemp, who was determined to find his daughter's killer. After losing his child, Roger felt like he had lost his purpose in life. However, he found a new reason to keep going: justice for Alexandra. In an interview, Roger explained his approach: "You can either give up or keep fighting. I chose to fight." Impressed by his dedication, the police department gave Roger a workspace where he could collect and share information and collaborate with the investigators. As they explored all available leads, Roger and the investigators contacted the popular TV show, America's Most Wanted, and asked them to feature Alexandra's case. The show's producers agreed, and her story was aired. The episode generated hundreds of calls from viewers with potential tips. Although the authorities thoroughly investigated each lead, none of them led to a breakthrough, and the case stalled once again. In February 2003, 8 months after Alexandra's death, a promising new lead emerged. Following a thorough investigation, police in Utah apprehended a suspect. 3 separate witnesses, including 2 women and a 14-year-old girl, came forward to report being forced into intimate encounters with a man. He had managed to evade capture initially, but was eventually tracked down and arrested in Utah. The arrested individual was identified as James Strader, the same person who had been questioned by Kansas police earlier. Notably, James bore a strong physical resemblance to the suspect's composite sketch. James was questioned by the police, but they failed to collect his DNA sample at the time. This might have been because his employer had convinced the police that James was at work on the day of the crime and had not left the premises. Despite this, James denied any involvement in Alexandra Kemp's death. Although he resembled the suspect in the composite sketch, James claimed he had not been near the pool on the day of the crime. He eventually provided a DNA sample for analysis. The results indicates that his DNA did not match the DNA found on Alexandra's body or the antiseptic gel tube. James was later imprisoned for unrelated charges, and the investigation into Alexandra Kemp's death hit a dead end once again. A year after Alexandra's death, the police still had no leads. Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, and Phil House, her boyfriend, continued to fight for justice. Who was also the president of the student community, sent the composite sketch of the suspect to students at other universities via email and asked them to watch an episode of America's Most Wanted that featured Alexandra Kemp's case. A year had passed, but the police and relatives' efforts had yielded no results in the Alexandra Kemp case. Undeterred, Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, continued his quest for justice. He reached out to the America's Most Wanted program again, requesting a rerun of the episode about Alexandra's death. The show's creators asked if there were any new developments, and although Roger replied that there were none, his determination impressed them, leading to the episode being aired again. The rerun generated a fresh wave of calls to the police, prompting Roger to offer a $25,000 reward for any information that could help identify the person responsible for his daughter's death. The city of Leawood authorities increased the reward to $50,000. Roger also distributed flyers featuring his daughter's photo, a sketch of the suspect, and details about the reward. As Roger drove along the highway, he noticed billboards and realized they could be an effective way to raise awareness about the case. He began contacting advertising agencies to inquire about the cost of posting the information on a billboard. When he called the Lamar Advertising Company, the owner refused to take his money, offering to display the information on multiple billboards for free instead. Roger decided to publicize a sketch of the suspect and reward information on billboards along a major highway. The police received hundreds of tips, which took time to investigate. Notably, multiple tips mentioned the same individual, Teddy Hoover, who owned an old Ford pickup truck and worked in pool maintenance. His appearance matched the suspect's, making it unlikely to be a coincidence. The police launched a search for Teddy Hoover and found his address in Kansas. When they arrived, Teddy answered the door, appearing surprised and nervous. However, this reaction didn't necessarily imply guilt, as many people become nervous when confronted by the police. When questioned about his whereabouts on June 18, 2002, Teddy claimed he couldn't remember, which was understandable given the year time lapse. Teddy denied any involvement in maintaining the pool where Alexandra worked. Nevertheless, the detectives asked him to provide a voluntary DNA sample to rule him out as a suspect. Teddy declined, stating he needed to consult with a lawyer first. He promised to contact the police after speaking with his attorney. The next day, Teddy's lawyer reached out to the investigators, expressing his client's concerns about his DNA sample being added to a database. Teddy reportedly believed in various conspiracy theories and feared that if he cooperated with the police, they would use the information against him in other cases. In an effort to alleviate his concerns, the investigators promised not to enter his DNA into any database and only use it to compare with the DNA found on Alexandra Kemp. The lawyer agreed to speak with his client and said he would call back. As they waited for the call, the police reviewed the case materials again and stumbled upon a piece of paper in one of the folders with a name that caught their attention. On the day of Alexandra's death, detectives began questioning onlookers who had gathered by the pool, trying to determine if anyone had seen anything suspicious. Interestingly, one of the people they spoke with was Teddy Hoover, who had claimed he had never been to the crime scene before. As the investigation continued, detectives grew increasingly confident that Teddy Hoover might be the man they had been searching for over the past 2 years. After several days, investigators contacted Teddy's lawyer to ask if his client was willing to provide a DNA sample. However, the lawyer responded by stating that his client had refused his services and broken off contact. Police immediately went to Teddy's house, but he had already escaped. As a result, the 29-year-old suspect was placed on the National Wanted list. Despite the efforts of the detectives, Teddy managed to evade capture for months. Billboards featuring his image were still up, but the search had yielded nothing. It wasn't until September 2004 when an anonymous caller contacted the police that a new lead emerged. According to the caller, he knew the name of Teddy's girlfriend with whom Teddy was living in Kansas. Detectives sought to locate Laura Barr, a woman connected to Teddy Hoover, but discovered she had left the state at the same time he escaped. This led them to investigate further. The U.S. Postal Service informed the Kansas State Police that Laura was receiving mail in Litchfield, Connecticut, along with a man named Benjamin Appleby, at the same address. The house where they resided was secluded and located in a rural area. Authorities suspected that Benjamin Appleby might be an alias for Teddy Hoover. To aid in the investigation, detectives from Leawood contacted the Connecticut State Police requesting their assistance in locating Benjamin. It was discovered that he had a prior record in Connecticut with an outstanding arrest warrant stemming from a 1997 incident where he had exposed himself to a schoolgirl. However, Benjamin had evaded capture and fled the state. With the existing warrant, detectives proceeded to the address associated with Benjamin's mail. Upon arrival, they found him at home and immediately took him into custody. As suspected, Benjamin Appleby was confirmed to be Teddy Hoover. It was revealed that while detectives in Kansas had been seeking a DNA sample from Teddy in connection with Alexandra Kemp's death, he had returned to Connecticut and resumed using his real name, attempting to maintain a low profile and escape notice. To apprehend Benjamin, detectives from Leawood traveled to Connecticut, anticipating that he would once again claim innocence. Before bringing him in for questioning, they devised a plan to unsettle him. They filled the interrogation room with crime scene photos and pictures of Alexander and placed folders with his name on the table, creating the illusion that the investigation had substantial evidence against him. When Benjamin entered the interrogation room, he was visibly shaken and unable to speak. A detective confronted him, inquiring about the implications of obtaining his DNA sample. Shortly after, Benjamin broke down in tears, confessing to Alexandra's death. He then recounted the events of the fateful June day, explaining that he had noticed Alexandra, found her attractive, and attempted to flirt with her. When she entered the pump room, he followed her, locked the door, and trapped her inside. When Benjamin touched she fought back, leaving him feeling humiliated. In a fit of anger, he attacked her, beating and strangling her until she lost consciousness. Benjamin then attempted to take advantage of her body, undressing her partially. He retrieved a tube of antiseptic gel from a first aid kit, intending to use it as a lubricant. However, Just as he was about to proceed, the sound of a car horn distracted him. The victim's friend, who was waiting in a car behind a fence, had noticed something was amiss and sounded the horn. Fearing he would be caught, Benjamin hastily covered the body and fled the scene. Later, Benjamin returned to the area, where he encountered Alexandra's friend, whom he greeted with a smile and a wave, trying to appear nonchalant. He then got into his pickup truck and drove away. Hours later, Benjamin returned to the crime scene again, this time blending in with the crowd of onlookers gathered near the pool. The DNA evidence ultimately led to Benjamin's downfall. Tests revealed that the DNA found on the tube of antiseptic gel and on Alexandra's body matched Benjamin's. Thanks in large part to the efforts of investigator Roger Kemp, the police were finally able to identify the man responsible for Alexandra's murder more than 2 years after the crime was committed. Benjamin Appleby claimed he initially wanted to plead guilty to avoid putting Alexandra's family through further emotional distress. However, at his first court hearing, he suddenly declared his innocence, stating that his confession was made under duress. Despite this, DNA analysis revealed that his DNA was the only sample found on the victim's body, making it difficult to dispute his involvement. Benjamin's lawyers attempted to argue that their client did not intentionally take Alexandra's life, admitting that he was responsible for her death but claiming it was not premeditated. However, forensic experts pointed out that Benjamin had strangled Alexandra for approximately 10 minutes, during which time he could have stopped but chose not to. The prosecution argued that Benjamin's sole intention was to observe Alexandra. On the day of the incident, June 18th, the pool area was empty due to cloudy weather, allowing Benjamin to take advantage of the situation. He was found guilty by a jury in December 2005 and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years, as well as an additional 19 years for attempting to force Alexandra into intimacy. In 2019, Benjamin appealed the decision, but the court upheld the life imprisonment sentence for first-degree murder. The Court of Appeal also ruled that the attempt to force Alexandra into intimacy was already taken into account during the initial sentencing. Benjamin was sentenced twice for the same crime, prompting the court to overturn the second conviction. However, even if Benjamin is released on parole, he will be 81 years old by that time. The authorities involved in the case credit Roger Kemp's persistence for helping them catch the culprit. While Benjamin was in prison, Roger and his wife established a self-defense program for girls, teaching thousands of girls and women across the country basic self-defense techniques. Roger Kemp's tireless efforts to bring attention to the case and his work in creating a safe community did not go unnoticed. He was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal by Barack Obama at the White House. Until his passing at 77 on March 1, 2022, Roger continued to work for the foundation he established in his daughter's name. His ultimate goal was to make a difference in at least one person's life. On March 24, 2007, British teacher Lindsay Ann Hawker left her home to give an English lesson to a student who desperately needed it. After a successful tutoring session at a local coffee shop in Tokyo, Lindsay did not hesitate to collect her fees from the student Tatsuya's house. After assuring the taxi driver that she would be back in a few minutes, Lindsay went inside the house, only to never come out again. So what horrors were awaiting poor Lindsay? How did the story of a young English teacher end up in such a dreadful tragedy? Let's dive right into this mystery without any further ado. Today's story takes us to Tokyo, Japan, one of the most popular tourist destinations around the globe. Situated at the head of Tokyo Bay on the Pacific coast of central Honshu, Japan's capital, Tokyo, is the largest metropolitan city in the world. Tokyo is known for its world-class transport system, otaku culture, historic temples, and wonderful cuisine. Old-school cultures mixed with futuristic technology provide the city with a certain charm. Although Tokyo is considered one of the safest places to live, a gruesome crime in 2007 would tell a different story. Bill Hawker and Julia Hawker raised their 3 kids in Coventry, West Midlands, England. Paul was the owner of a driving school while Julia worked as a policy advisor. They both worked very hard to provide the best life for their 3 children, Lisa, Lindsay, and Louise. Born on December 30th, 1984, Lindsay and Hawker was the middle-born of the three girls. Living an idyllic life, this family of five were close to one another. Lindsay was described as a free-spirited, kind, intelligent, and beautiful girl. She was gorgeous inside and out. Despite being so popular throughout her life, she was the kind of person who would drop anything to help someone. Lindsay's brilliance in academics was never hidden from anyone who knew her. After completing high school at King Henry VII School in Coventry, she completed her A-levels in biology, history, and computing. She then ventured to Leeds University to study biology and went on to achieve first-class honors degree in biology, graduating in 2006. Going for a master's degree was Lindsay's next plan. However, her adventurous spirit led her down another path. Lindsay had a lot going on for her. After obtaining her master's degree, she wanted to become a doctor, marry her boyfriend to 4 years Ryan, and start her own family. However, before pursuing the master's degree, Lindsay wanted to take a break from her studies to add a new perspective to her life. So in mid-2006, she hatched a plan to teach English in another country. She soon found herself signing up for Nova Teaching School in Tokyo, Japan. It was the country that Lindsay always wanted to visit at some point in her life, as she had fallen in love with its culture long ago. Like a dream coming true, Lindsay surpassed the tough competition and finally earned the chance to teach at Nova Teaching School for 1 year. Lindsay was so excited to go to Japan that she went from learning Japanese to studying their culture before ever boarding the plane. Nova English School is considered one of the largest private schools that recruits people from every corner of the globe to teach English in Osaka and Tokyo. After landing in Tokyo, Lindsay quickly found comfort in her work. She was loved by all her students and co-workers and even shared accommodation in Chiba with 2 other female teachers. In fact, she adapted so well in Japan that she made friends with locals within a short span of time. Despite her busy schedule, Lindsay stayed in regular contact with her family and her boyfriend. In December 2006, around the time of her birthday, Lindsay's parents visited her in Japan. She was so happy to see them and smiled the whole time. In the summer of 2007, Ryan was set to visit Lindsay, and they were to travel together and settle down in the UK. It was at this time that a bizarre incident took place that changed Lindsay's life, and the lives of all those who loved her. The strange event involved meeting Tatsuya Ichihashi, a 28-year-old Japanese man. Tatsuya Ichihashi was born to a medical doctor father and a dentist mother on November 5, 1979 in Gifu Prefecture, Japan. Due to his parents' frequent relocation, Ichihashi grew up back and forth between Gifu and Chiba. With luxury always within his reach, Ichihashi was simply a spoiled brat. After completing his graduation in the Department of Horticulture from Chiba University in 2005, he remained unemployed. Even at such an adult age, he was living off of 100,000 yen allowance from his parents, which was equivalent to about $600 at the time. Although Ichihashi did not have an official criminal record, he had been the subject of allegations of theft and injury 6 years prior to before he met Lindsay. Allegedly, he assaulted a woman on the street during a robbery, but the matter was settled outside of court for an undisclosed amount. This should have been a lesson in Ichihashi's life, but it changed nothing. In March 2006, he was 28 years old and lived in a 3 BHK luxury apartment at his parents' expense. Ichihashi was a loner who kept to himself while obsessing over physical fitness. He followed a daily routine of attending the gym and cycling 25 kilometers. His interest in violent manga comics showed signs of a psychopathic mindset. He was in a stable relationship with a woman for almost a year, but that did not stop him from stalking a young woman on public transport. At the end of March 2007, Lindsay shared a weird experience she had with a local guy, Tatsuya Ichihashi. In an email sent to her boyfriend Ryan, she wrote how Ichihashi had approached Lindsay on her train journey home from work. At first, he claimed that she was his English teacher, but backed away a bit when Lindsay denied ever teaching him. He then asked her to confirm that she was an English teacher. If this was not creepy enough, after exiting the train, he ran after Lindsay's bicycle all the way back to her apartment. Ichihashi then requested a glass of water, assuring Lindsay that he wouldn't bother her anymore after that. Perhaps any other person would have called for help instead of indulging the stalker's request and giving him a glass of water. But the kind of person Lindsay was, despite freaking out, she still felt sorry for him. She confessed to Ryan that she let Ichihashi inside her apartment, considering it is an opportunity to show his face to her coworkers just in case something bad were to happen. After entering the apartment, Ichihashi took a paper and pen and drew a sketch of Lindsay, signing it with his name, contact number, and email address. At this point, Ichihashi had already asked her if she was interested in giving him an English lesson, but Lindsay, being cautious, said that she had a tight schedule. However, she could not reject the offer when Ichihashi proposed that they could meet in a public place and told her that he would pay her generously by the hour. The meeting was scheduled for 4 days after the day he sent her the email. Poor Lindsay had no idea that she had just made a deal with the devil, which would cost her more than she could have ever imagined. On Saturday, March 24th, 2007, Lindsay and Ichihashi met in Dutour Cafe in East Tokyo. The lesson went on for over an hour and everything seemed to be going well. Then Ichihashi told her to come with him to his place to obtain the money as he did not bring the money with him. Though a little worried, Lindsay decided to go with him as she did not want to miss out on the hard-earned money. So the two hopped inside a taxi. Lindsay had to work later in the afternoon, so when they reached the destination, Lindsay told the taxi driver to wait for her as she would be right back within a few minutes. The taxi driver waited for the next 7 minutes and then went on his way thinking that she had changed her mind. Lindsay never came out of that house. Lindsay neither showed up for work that day nor did she make it to her apartment. Her coworkers grew worried but assumed that she might be staying with a friend. But Saturday turned into Sunday and Sunday turned into Monday. It was only on Monday, March 26, 2007, when Lindsay missed the second day of work without any prior notice that panic set in among her colleagues. Nova Teaching School informed Lindsay's parents and filed a missing person report to the authorities. When the police were finally involved in Lindsay Hawker's disappearance, 2 critical days had already passed, but they had a suspect in mind. During the investigation, Lindsay's roommates told the detectives that she went to meet a man named Ichihashi before she went missing. In addition, the note signed by Ichihashi with his contact information was a big clue for them. Detectives also extracted the CCTV footage of Dutour Cafe and confirmed that Lindsay was with Ichihashi. At around 5:40 p.m., 2 police officers were dispatched to Ichihashi's house, but they did not have a warrant, so they were not permitted to go in without cause. They waited by the front door before a neighbor let them into his apartment balcony. Officers noticed that although no lights were on, someone was lurking around inside the apartment. For some odd reason, the detachable bathtub of Ichihashi's apartment was removed and placed on the balcony. The officers called for backup as they suspected Lindsay could be held hostage in the apartment. Within an hour, 7 more officers arrived at the scene. Police were banging on his door when suddenly Ichihashi flung open the door and stormed past the officers barefoot. In a moment of shock, police officers let Ichihashi slip away while managing to grab his rucksack. In the absence of radio equipment, police could not keep track of him and the man vanished into the Tokyo crowd. Investigators were in for a gruesome shock when they entered Ichihashi's apartment. The bathtub placed on the balcony was filled with sand and soil. Flower seeds were on top of the bathtub to disguise it as a flowering tub. Upon closer inspection, the bathtub revealed a hand emerging out of the debris. The body, which was bound and gagged with plastic ties and scarves, was identified as Lindsay's after the autopsy. Further details from the autopsy report revealed that Lindsay was raped and bruises were found all over her upper body. Decomposing agents were also placed in the bathtub to speed up the decomposition process. In her final hours, Lindsay was subjected to an extreme assault. For some unknown sick reason, before killing Lindsay, Ichihashi shaved off her beautiful hair as a sick final insult. By the next morning, Tatsuya Ichihashi was officially a wanted man. All over Japan, police distributed wanted posters with his photo printed on them. Not only that, but his face was all over the media and news channels. Police asked the public to come forward with any information or possible sightings of Ichihashi. Police even released Ichihashi's photoshopped images wearing wigs, as after finding wigs in his apartment. A reward was announced for anyone who would come forward with legitimate information about the wanted man. But in spite of all their efforts, seemed as though Ichihashi had vanished into thin air. Lindsay's family was devastated and frustrated. They went through all the pain of losing Lindsay only to watch the killer get away. Months after Lindsay's death, her parents, Bill and Julia, traveled to Japan from the UK to raise awareness about their daughter's murder. They believed that the Japanese police did not do their job properly, allowing the killer to slip away from the grip of 9 police officers. Japanese police were in the light of constant criticism. Soon, British and Japanese media got involved in the situation, which was only getting worse. During all of this turmoil and publicity, Ichihashi was out there somewhere, living his life. During his time on the run, Ichihashi had actually traveled most of Japan. Between 2008 and 2009, he settled down in Osaka City, located 250 miles from West Tokyo, where the crime was committed. During this time, he routinely lived in internet cafes and worked on construction sites. To avoid detection at times, he even lived in a concrete bunker on a remote island. Any money that he earned all went to plastic surgery in order to change his appearance. However, Ichihashi had already changed his appearance through self-mutilation right after he became a fugitive. This is how he was able to evade arrest for so long. He cut off his mole, a part of his lower lip, and altered the shape of his nose by sewing it with thread. In 2009, in desperate need of information, the Japanese police increased the amount of the reward that was announced before. Police also released a statement saying that they believe that Ichihashi had performed cosmetic surgery on his face to alter his appearance and that people need to be on the lookout for unique identifying marks. In October 2009, after 2 years of evading justice, Ichihashi's time was up. Following the release statement from the police, a plastic surgeon called investigators with some valuable information regarding the case. The doctor believed that the man he had just performed plastic surgery on was none other than Tatsuya Ichihashi. Call it foolishness or recklessness, but Ichihashi allowed the surgeon to take a before and after picture of the surgery. Those photos eventually blew his cover, and the ruse was finally discovered when one of his co-workers from the construction site recognized Ichihashi and called the police. Realizing what had happened, Ichihashi fled Osaka and took shelter in the abandoned bunkers found in the neighboring remote islands. In November 2009, he made a run for a ferry in Osaka Ferry Port. This was when finally his luck would run out as a staff member recognized him and informed the police. On November 10, 2009, after keeping a low profile for 3 more days, police apprehended Ichihashi. Realizing that his game was over, he immediately confessed to being Tatsuya Ichihashi. With his arrest, one of Japan's most notorious criminal investigations came to a conclusion. However, Ichihashi did not confess to the murder immediately during his initial 23-day period of detention. He was originally charged with 1 count of abandoning a body, but police later added 2 more charges of rape and murder. On December 23, 2009, one of Ichihashi's lawyers announced that he had finally acknowledged involvement in Lindsay's death, but also claimed that he had not killed her intentionally. In court, he claimed that he had accidentally suffocated Lindsay during the sexual assault and that his efforts to resurrect her had failed. On July 21, 2011, the Chiba District Court of Japan sentenced Ichihashi to life imprisonment for the senseless murder of Lindsay Hawker. Although Lindsay's family was seeking the death penalty, they were satisfied with the sentence as their prolonged wait for justice was finally over. Lindsay's father Bill said, "We've waited 4.5 years to get justice for Lindsay. We have achieved that today and we are very pleased." Ichihashi wrote a book entitled Until I Was Arrested in 2011 about his time on the run. He offered Lindsay's family all of the royalties the book might earn, an offer the family had rejected. In 2013, a movie, I Am Ichihashi, Journal of a Murderer, was also released based on the book Ichihashi wrote. However, Lindsay's family found it distasteful. The case of Cassie Farrington. Cassie was born on December 22, 1990, in Virginia. She was the second of 4 children to Chuck and Darlene Brooks. Cassie excelled academically and was an active student, she becoming a member of the National Honor Society and participating in sports. Her initial goal was to pursue a career in medicine. However, when Cassie turned 16, her life drastically changed. She became pregnant, which led her to change her future goals and plans. Several major changes in Cassie's life occurred in the next month. Cassie graduated from high school, gave birth to a baby, married Bradley Farrington, and moved out of her parents' house, all within a brief period, just 1 month. Several years later, she had another child. But over time, her family relationship began to deteriorate. Ultimately, the marriage ended in divorce. Despite this, she persevered, raising her 2 young children in Silver City, a small town with a population of about 10,000. At 22 years old, she worked as a nurse at the local hospital and rented a place from a coworker. As she turned 23, Cassie entered into a new relationship with a man named David Barry. He bonded quickly with her children, and she felt grateful for the way things were going good. Rather than rushing into things, they focused on building a life as a family unit. Cassie confided in her loved ones and coworkers that David had brought happiness to both her and her children, and she was hopeful that this new relationship would bring her the peace and happiness she had been missing after her previous failed marriage. On March 24, 2014, Cassie phoned her parents after finishing her night shift at the Silver City Hospital. They chatted for a few minutes, during which she shared her plan to drive home, pick up her children, and take them to school. Afterward, she intended to return home and rest for a couple of hours before picking her children up from school later that day. School staff called Cassie's parents when they couldn't reach her. Her children had finished their classes, but Cassie hadn't shown up to pick them up. Cassie's mother tried calling her, but there was no answer. Thinking Cassie might have overslept after a night shift, her mother asked Cheryl, her landlord, to check if Cassie was home and if she was okay. Cheryl went to the house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. She then walked around the house and peered through the back door window, noticing water pouring from the bathroom into the kitchen. She knocked harder on the door and shouted Cassie's name, but still got no response. With her own key, Cheryl unlocked the door and entered the house. The sound of running water was louder and more distinct. As she walked across the wet floor towards the bathroom, Cheryl called out Cassie's name, her voice shaking slightly. Then she saw Cassie. Cheryl, a coworker and friend of Cassie's, discovered her lifeless body in the overflowing bathtub. She was lying face down, wearing a house robe, as water continued to pour out. Despite Cheryl's first aid skills, she realized that Cassie had been dead for a few hours, as rigor mortis had already set in. This made CPR impossible. Cheryl immediately called 911 to report the incident. She then broke the devastating news to Cassie's parents over the phone, informing them of their daughter's passing. As Cheryl waited for the paramedics and police to arrive, she took a moment to inspect the house. She noticed that the second bathroom, located elsewhere in the house, also had an open faucet with running water. However, the hub there had an overflow protection, so the excess water wasn't running onto the floor but going down the drain. Cheryl also observed that the towel rack in the bathroom had been pulled off the wall and was lying on the floor. Upon receiving the news, Chuck and Darlene, Cassie's parents, were devastated. They stopped everything they were doing and traveled from Arizona to Silver City. Within a few hours, they arrived at the house where their daughter's body had been found. The police were already on the scene, investigating the circumstances surrounding Cassie's death. The officers observed that there was no sign of forced entry into the house, as all the locks were still in place, the windows were closed, and the glass was intact. Additionally, valuables in the house were still intact, so the possibility of robbery was unlikely. The local sheriff questioned Chuck and Darlene, asking if Cassie had any intention of committing suicide and if she had any reason for doing so. However, Chuck and Darlene firmly dismissed this idea and declared that there was no way Cassie would do such a thing. The police chief repeatedly told Cassie's parents that she had likely taken her own life, as if he was trying to convince them of that fact. However, Cassie's parents found the police investigation to be rushed and confusing. Normally, the scene of the case is thoroughly examined and investigated, a process that can take several days. In Cassie's case, the police left the scene just a few hours after her body was found, and they informed Cheryl that she was allowed to enter and use the house. This worries Cassie's parents, and they decide to investigate the house themselves. After finding water still in the bathtub, they emptied it and discovered black streaks on the sides of the tub that resembled the marks left by rubber-soled shoes. They also found Cassie's glasses, hairband, and a coat hanger in various places on the floor. Cassie's parents were even more suspicious when the police didn't take the time to search the house for fingerprints. They suspected that the authorities might be trying to close the case quickly without thoroughly investigating it. It wasn't until they contacted the district attorney's office that the police appeared to put in more effort. However, they were still unable to close the case due to the findings of the medical examiner. The autopsy report showed that Cassie had several bruises on her body, particularly around her neck. The examiner concluded that her death was a homicide. However, the investigation had difficulty by the property owner having cleaned up and made some repairs after the incident. This meant that the original crime scene had been disturbed, which could impact the investigation's progress. Cassie's parents were met with silence from the police as the months went by. The police did investigate David Barry, a man Cassie had been seen before her death, but he was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to a solid alibi. However, as time passed, Cassie's parents grew increasingly frustrated with the local police, feeling they were not doing enough to solve the case. Their concerns led Chuck and Darlene to request a meeting with the chief district attorney to voice their dissatisfaction with the handling of the investigation, specifically with Detective Jose Sanchez. After reviewing the case file, the district attorney agreed with the parents, finding that Jose had made numerous errors. As a result, Jose was removed from the case and a more experienced detective took over. From the start, Cassie's family and friends suspected her ex-husband, Bradley Farrington, was responsible for her death. At the time of Cassie's passing, Cassie and Bradley was entangled in a heated custody battle over their children, and Bradley stood to gain the most from Cassie's death because he will win custody of the child. Bradley Farrington is a former Silver City police officer who had just retired a few months before Cassie's death, and his good relationship with investigators kept him from being considered a suspect. However, Bradley had a clear motive for the crime and possessed the necessary knowledge to destroy evidence. He was well aware of police procedures and how to cover his tracks. For example, the bath water will wash away any remaining DNA evidence on the body, as well as erase shoe prints on the floor. Given Cassie's familiarity with Bradley, it's likely that she would have opened the door for him. Unfortunately, due to the poor handling of the investigation by the local police, so any evidence linking Bradley and to the crime scene was lost and could not be restored. The only remaining way to hold Bradley accountable is through eyewitness testimony. Cassie had told her parents about their family being abused by Bradley and that he often acted arrogant because he was a police officer. Cassie lived in constant fear, and Bradley's friends were police officers and she couldn't turn to them for help. She had confided in coworkers about Bradley's threats, including the ominous threat that he would make her disappear without a trace. Tragically, her life was cut short and she was found dead on March 24, 2014. 19 months later, on October 23, 2015, 28-year-old Bradley Farrington was arrested in connection with Cassie's death. Although Bradley was a suspect, the local police mishandled evidence, leaving none that directly linked him to the crime. As a result, the judge made a decision permitting previously recorded statements from Cassie to be used as testimony during the trial. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified, including Cassie's parents, friends, and co-workers, to whom she had confided about the abuse she endured at the hands of Bradley. Notable among the witnesses was Dr. Michael Hunter, a renowned forensic expert from San Francisco. With over 20 years of experience, Michael presented the jury with autopsy photographs and concluded that Cassie likely died from strangulation. Cassie had injuries to her neck which supported that conclusion. After a warrant was issued for Bradley's arrest, Jose Sanchez, who initially handled the case, appeared in court. Jose claimed he had never considered Bradley Farrington a suspect because there was no reason to, and also testified that no fingerprints of Bradley were found at Cassie's home. The crime scene was unusually clean, Jose said. He believed the scene was cleaned after the crime was committed, which explains why no fingerprints were found. After 4.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Bradley Farrington guilty on September 7th. In 2018, Bradley was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He later filed an appeal with the New Mexico Supreme Court in 2020. Bradley appealed his conviction, claiming the trial court erred in allowing Cassie's coworkers, friends, and family members to testify in court. However, the state's highest court declared it had enough evidence to convict Bradley and rejected his appeal. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.